Alright, playing 5-10 no limit at the Bellagio, and in the first interesting hand, I don't yet have the camera ready. We're 6-handed and there's a late position raise of 30. I call from the small blind with Queen Jack of Hearts, and we go heads up to a flop of King 7-5 with a couple of hearts, giving me the second nut flush draw. I check, and late position c-bets 40. I think it's fair to say that this is a standard play for him to c-bet, but his holding should be fairly wide even though he could very well have a king. We are playing 1500 deep, and I opt for a check raise to 120, in an effort to begin putting pressure on his non-king holdings. He calls, and 4th street comes the 10 of spades, so a good card as I pick up straight equity. I continue the aggression for 240, he calls once again. River comes an interesting card. It's the queen of spades, so our river showdown. I check, and now my opponent fires 340. At first thought it feels like a king, but given that we started this spot playing short-handed with him raising from late position, he could have some weaker holdings like 6-8 or bricked hearts, namely the nut flush draw. That in mind, I put in the call, and he mucks. Take down a nice pot to start the session. Shortly after there's a late position post, early position raises to 40, I just get the camera set up and I flat from middle position with pocket 10s. Heads up to a flop of 8-8-6 rainbow. He c-bets 50 and it's perhaps standard to just flat, but I also like a raise just because players do tend to be more wide and aggressive in 5-10 games. I put in a raise to 150 for value and a bit of protection. I should also be able to gain a bit more clarity depending on his response. He ends up calling, and we go to a turn of a queen of spades. He checks, and I play some pot control and check back. River comes to ace of spades, and he leads for a polarized bet of 380. Another interesting spot here, my check back on the turn may have saved me money, or I let him get there on the river. I'm not beating value, of course, so if I call, I'd have to be confident that my opponent is turning 7s or 9s into a bluff. Don't feel that strong about it. I fold. I then get moved to the main game and I've got Jack 10 off in the small blind. The big blind does not chop, so I raise to 30. He calls. Flop comes ace queen 5 with a hard draw. Good flop to c-bet and I put out 30. He calls. Turn comes to 6 of clubs. Gonna keep firing here on this board texture and probably go all 3 streets in this situation if needed. I bet 100. Don't need to hit or fire 5th street though, as my opponent folds. Next spot I raise to 30 from the cutoff with King 10 of clubs. Small blind puts in a raise to 50. Not sure if that was an accident, but I think I heard him say he meant to make it 60. The 50 is still a valid raise though, and I call. Heads up to a flop of 8-6-5 rainbow. Small blind c-bets 70, and while I just have some hopeful backdoors, I'm just going to leverage this board that should be in my favor. I raise to 200. He doesn't think too long and lets it go. Take down a small one here. Not too long after, there's a small blind raise to 30. I've got ace king of clubs in the big blind, and 3 bets in 90. He calls, and the flop comes ace jack deuce rainbow. Good flop with top pair top kicker along with backdoor nut potential. He check calls my down c-bet of 70. Turn comes a 6 of spades, good relative blank. He checks, I fire again, this time for 240 hoping to cool off ace queen, along with other valid targets such as non-believing ace wheels, and a variety of draws. He tanks and puts in the call. 5th street comes a deuce of diamonds, and that's as clean as it gets. He checks, and sizing is the main consideration here. I think at least 2/3 is in order, as I don't want to give too attractive of a price to call. Say I was betting a bluff instead with a bricked Broadway draw. I settle on a bet of 600. He thinks about it for a bit, and releases his hand. Hand immediately after, there's a late position limp. Button, who is the same player from the previous hand, raises to 40. I'm in the small blind with King Jack of diamonds. In tougher games like these 5-10 stakes, people will often advocate a 3-bet or fold strategy from the small blind, which I'm definitely on board with. That said, I think mixing flats is fine on occasion, and another consideration is that I just 3-bet this opponent in the previous hand, and I don't want it to feel like I'm targeting him. I flat, and we go heads up to a flop of King Queen 10 with a spade draw. Solid flop, and I check call his c-bet of 50. Turn comes a 4 of spades, completing the front door flush. Not the best card, but prepare to check call another bet, unless the sizing is off-putting. He ends up checking back, and we go to a river of a 6 of clubs. Could bet for thin value, targeting ace queen and queen jack, but I check instead. He knuckles back, I table, and it's good. Next hand, there's a $30 raise from the cutoff. Small blind 3 bets to 130, and I'm in the big blind with ace jack of clubs. Once again, an interesting decision point. Offsuit, I think it's a more clear 3-better fold. In this spot, just gonna go with playing field poker, and I flat. Cutoff calls as well, and go 3 ways to a flop of 8-7-5 rainbow. Action checks through, and the turn comes a 5 of diamonds, and after small blind checks, I consider a bet since my hand does look something like 7s through jacks, but the cutoff can certainly have similar holdings as well. I decide to check instead, and cutoff smartly takes the green light and bets 210. Small blind folds, and I do the same. A couple orbits later, under the gun limps and middle position raises to 40. I flat from the button with pocket 8s, the big blind and under the gun call as well. 4 ways to a flop of 5-4 deuce, all hearts. Big blind checks, under the gun bets 50, middle position folds, I call with an overpair and a heart draw, big blind folds. Heads up to a turn of a 4 of spades. Under the gun now checks, and I decide to go for some value / denial, with primary targets being pocket 3s, 6s, and 7s. I bet 160, he thinks for a bit, and puts in the call. River comes to case 4, and now my opponent leads for $500. It's a polarizing bet, so I don't think he's doing this with 7s or 6s or a 5, because that would be an overplay for value. Is he turning deuces or 3s into a bluff? Or does he just have it with ace 4 or pocket 5s? Bit of a thin and tough spot. I get curious and put in the 500 and get shown 4 deuce of clubs for quads. Yeah, that was a bad call.
Wow.
Next interesting hand, under the gun raises to 40. I flat from the small blind with 9-10 of clubs. The big blind comes along as well. 3 ways to a flop of queen 8-6 with a heart draw, so I flop a double gutter with backdoor clubs. Checks to under the gun who bets 80. Can mix here, and I flat looking to potentially check raise a variety of turns. The big blind calls as well. Continuing 3 ways to a gin turn, which comes a jack of spades, and that's a card that I'm very happy to check raise. It checks over to under the gun who continues the aggression for 250. He's playing around 1200 back, and I check raise to 700. Big blind folds, and just hoping under the gun has any of the big pairs, he jams for 1450. I call, and we're off to a river of a 6 of spades pairing the board. Rough card as I expect to lose to queens or jacks now. I table, and it's not good for the full pot, but it is for half the pot as he tables 9-10 as well. Although I don't scoop, I'm very happy to see my opponent had the same hand, given that river went out. Shortly after, there's a low jack raise to 30. Hijack calls, and I 3-bet to 140 from the cutoff with ace-king offsuit. Big blind cold calls, low jack calls as well, and the hijack folds. 3 ways to a flop of 7-5 deuce rainbow. Checks to me. I c-bet 180 to rep an overpair. Big blind folds, the low jack calls. Heads up to a turn of a 4 of clubs, giving me a dirty wheel draw. He checks. I'm gonna keep repping, and I size up this time to 430 with another 1600 effective behind. He thinks it through for a bit and puts in the call. River comes, the queen of spades, and he checks again. And I'm supposed to go for it and get him off pocket 8s through jacks. But he seems like a fairly good player, and quite frankly, I just chicken out. I knuckle back, he wins with pocket 10s. The straddle is on in this next one, and I raise to 60 from early position with pocket 6s. Late position and big blind call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of queen 4-4 rainbow. Checks to me, I c-bet 110, late position folds, the big blind calls. Heads up to a turn of a 3 of hearts. Probably still have the best hand, but 6s are definitely vulnerable. I fire 260, and late position folds. Next spot, hijack raises to 30, and I've got the spade club version of the previous hand in the cutoff, and I put in the call. Heads up to a flop of 7-5-5 with a couple of hearts and a club. Good board for the 6s, and he check calls my bet of 30. Turn comes a 10 of hearts, completing the front door flush. When he checks, I check back. River comes a 9 of clubs, and my opponent leads for 120. I'm struggling to find bluffs on this board, and my opponent's name is Ryan, who does tune into the videos. He and I have been friendly, so I'd like to think that he isn't bluffing me. I show him the 6s and ultimately let it go, and he ends up showing me 3-4 of clubs for the bluff. I should have known better that these guys from Texas never have it. Nice play, Ryan.
6 would have been nice.
Shortly after, I raise a 30 from under the gun with ace jack offsuit. The big blind defends, and the flop comes king jack 10 with a spade draw. Big blind check calls my c bet of 30, and the turn comes a 9 of clubs, putting up a one-liner. Big blind checks and can just check back, but I'm probably behind and I don't want to just give up. I bet to try and rep the queen and just hope that he folds some sort of king rag suited, and even denying against spades isn't too bad should he have that type of holding. I bet 50, and he check raises the 210. If he's bluffing, then credit to the man, but I let it go. Last hand to run through, low jack raises the 30, and I've got pocket nines in the hijack. In these mid to late position dynamics, I like mixing in these spots. I choose the 3-bet to 100, and the low jack calls. Heads up to a flop of jack 9-4 rainbow. Always nice to flop a set in a 3-bet pot. Low jack checks, I c bet 120, low jack calls. Turn is a blank 6 of clubs, low jack checks, and targets are a bit slim, namely a jack, queen 10 suited, and maybe stubborn pocket 10s. With my opponent having 1k back, I choose to bet a size of 340, which should leave a solid amount to jam river, pending a clean run out. Perhaps could have gone with a smaller size, but I'm probably firing missed overs for a similar price. Anyhow, low jack doesn't think too long and lets it go. Okay, closing things out from the McCarran Airport here in Las Vegas. Didn't have enough time to shoot the outro at Bellagio, but got in the game for 1,500, didn't have to add on, and out for 25.32. So book a profit of 10.32 over about 5 hours of play. A couple spots I definitely would have liked to have back. The pocket eights hand and the ace queen hand that I didn't fire that triple barrel. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this one. Didn't play my best, made a ton of mistakes, but still found a way to book a win. So happy with that. And just gonna head back to the Bay Area, get a ton of rest, and I'll see you on the next one.